and welcome to the Comic, Science Fiction, and Fantasy Fans Fantastic Forum. I'm your host, Ulysses Campbell, and we're very pleased that you've joined us today. My panelists for today's scintillating and exciting conversation are Billie Rae Bates.
Hello.
Roberto Ortiz. And Marc Villa. We're going to be talking about some real good geek stuff, mainly smartest comic book characters. Well, okay, I need to put a fine point on that because I said smartest, and a geek friend of mine said, well, okay, you know, that could mean any number of things. So when I say smart in this case, I'm talking about the guys who can scientifically come up with all kinds of crazy stuff and building the Jack Kirby style machines with the cosmic stuff coming off of them and all that. The character that I believe is the most scientifically gifted, smartest character in all of comics, and that is Reed Richards, Mr. Fantastic, head of the Fantastic Four. Because this guy has built some stuff. I mean, I just can't even believe this stuff. I remember back when Stan Lee and Jack Kirby were drawing this book, and well, when Stan was writing and Jack Kirby was drawing the book. I mean, the stuff that he came up with was just absolutely unbelievable. So, you know, he's my number one.
Well, for me, it's villain. It has to be Lex Luthor, specifically. I like the fact that the way originally character was intended, basically was to be a scientist, basically was a mad scientist that Superman fought. In the 80s, they made him into an industrialist, and now we have this merge of both things where you have this person who happens to be a genius who also happens to be an industrialist. And I like that of the character, that it's incredibly driven and incredibly smart, and he can build these things to fight specifically Superman. That it's not a man who is smart, it's a man who is smart and is very comfortable with the idea of being smart, and he basically wants everybody to know how smart he is. It's kind of like an evil version of Reed Richards, taken to the nth degree.
I have to think of Batman, and of course, by the same token, Batgirl, Barbara Gordon, but I should say Oracle, not the actual, I mean, to a greater extent Oracle, especially after her transformation, because she had to enhance that part of her abilities much more. And so as far as computer sciences, yes, very intelligent, very gifted.
I'm going to have to second that from Billie Rae, because I was thinking of Batman also. We're so used to seeing, especially in some of the film and television incarnations of Batman, we're so used to thinking of, we hear the name Batman and we automatically think of some sort of ninja-like guy who goes in and can beat people up and do all these incredible athletic things, which of course he can, but we forget, he made his debut in a comic book called Detective Comics, and there's a reason for that, because he is first and foremost a detective, and I think his keen intellect and deductive reasoning and his intelligence are one of the things that make him one of the great superheroes. And you talk about building stuff. I mean, look, Batwing, Batboat, Batmobile. How many different Batmobiles have we been through now? He built a cave under his house. Speaking
of caves, how about this guy? A guy who basically built an armor on a cave, for crying out loud, to make a point.
Out of scraps.
Out of scraps. I mean, Tony Stark basically has to be one of the best presentations of an incredibly smart person who is also incredibly wild. It's this weird combination that you never see of a person who is aggressively smart, but is also the life of the party. Usually there's this cliche of the scientist who's basically socially awkward and doesn't have social skills. No, Tony is Tony. He is like, he goes there, he's the life of the party. He'll basically pick up every single woman in the room because he can do it. But at the same time, he'll go back downstairs and invent a new armor.
Because he's savvy. He's good with people.
He is amazing with people. He knows, he basically used that intellect that he has and use it also to figure out people and get them down to a science on how to basically get people to do things unlike him too. And that's something I really always liked about Iron Man, that Tony is this larger-than-life kind of guy. What do you think?
That's an excellent point, Roberto, because, like I said, Reed Richards is my number one. I mean, I got to tell you, Dr. Doom, Victor Von Doom, is my number two. But Tony Stark is really smart. And the fact that he is not socially awkward like Reed or Victor is significant. You know, I mean, in some cases, in fact, Billie Rae, you were talking about smart as, I mean, simply beyond scientifically,
Beyond
and
intellect,
and
right.
so I'm thinking that could that possibly be an example of that?
Perhaps. I also think of Martian Manhunter.
Yeah.
Because he has several gifts. Of course, he is very smart. I think he's very intelligent, but also he seems to have this ability to just kind of solve problems. You know, everyone else may be running off and getting into chaos. You really saw that in the Justice League animated series from
That's
a few
very
years ago.
true.
That he was like the level head of reason, and he kind of, stepped into the situation, brought it all together, brought calm out of chaos.
I was just thinking earlier this week of the Atom, Ray Palmer, who,
He's smart.
on the one hand, he's a scientist by trade, so he's clearly very smart. And to top it all off, I mean, if you think about his abilities, his powers, what could be more sort of scientifically challenging or enriching than being able to shrink down and see the building blocks of the universe? I was reading those second features in Adventure Comics from earlier this year featuring the Atom, and those two one-shots that bookended it, and that's sort of what kind of made me remember that, because he gets to see all this stuff.
How about French scientists like Dr. Silvana or Dr. Magnus from the Mental Men? I mean, we
They're
have
smart.
plenty of examples of basically French scientists who specialize in certain things. Dr. Silvana, basically, for some bizarre reason, obsessed with Captain Marvel,
red
God knows
cheese.
why. And basically, the Dr. Magnus, for some bizarre reason, building robots that basically worship him. And
Especially Platinum.
yeah,
That's
what the
kinda
heck
kinky,
is up with that?
you know?
And but anyway, but that's actually good examples of characters that basically have like specialties in the fringe of the super science.
While we were having this conversation, I was thinking that so many superheroes and villains are scientists. There's so many characters that are scientifically based. I mean, like people like Spider-Man.
Poison
and-
Ivy.
Yeah, Poison Ivy. No, that's
Pamela
another.
Isley.
Yeah, I mean,
But I think the problem basically goes that in terms of villains, in terms of scientifically minded supervillains, this goes back to the 1920s, 1930s, where basically people all of a sudden basically changed societies between a society that basically was an agriculture to technology that basically kept hitting them left and right. And a lot of people basically were afraid of all these changes, and they associated it to scientists, thus the mad scientists that came out of there. And I think that you see that also reflected in comic books. Specifically, a lot of mad scientists basically were there to basically just to acquire knowledge. Going back to the big one, Victor Frankenstein. The whole concept of the nut, basically just there to get knowledge. Sorry, just ranting.
well, no, I mean, but that makes a lot of sense too. And because Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, was one of these big works, and the way that people responded to that, I thought is also interesting. Because I think that there tends to be, at least in terms of society, a certain fear of intellect.
Oh yeah.
I mean, certainly misused intellect, but fear of intellect in general. I mean, the kid in your class who's a little too smart, it's sort of intimidating for a lot of people.
There's a certain amount of power in intellect. I think it's a fear of someone else having more power.
That's an interesting observation that you associate intellect with power.
Well, that's
It can
certainly
be a
the way a
form
lot
of
of these
power.
characters look at it. I mean, that's the whole crux of the thing between Richards and Doom.
Yes.
I mean, in fact, Doom is obsessed with the notion of beating this guy because he's afraid that he's smarter, and frankly he is. Because I remember in the origin of Dr. Doom, Reed had wandered into his dorm room, and he's looking at these figures, and hey, gee, you're off a few decimals here, and Doom just couldn't imagine that he was wrong about anything, and so he went ahead with this experiment, and that was what led him down the road to beginning to ruin his face, depending on which version of that origin you look at.
Or how about Lex Luthor, the whole fact that he wants basically humanity to admire his intellect. And there comes this God who is not intellectual at all, and everybody admires him.
He has
Well,
power. Superman has immense power
but
without even
Superman-
wanting to.
Yeah,
Exactly.
But Superman is smart too.
But the
I
thing is that
mean-
he doesn't, the way Luthor sees it is, I earned this. How dare you?
He's very power hungry.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I see that we are coming to the end of our first segment, so I don't know exactly what's coming up, but it's going to be really cool. So you stay right where you are and don't move a muscle, and we're going to have a great interview for you and surely something else before we come back with the rest of this exciting discussion that we have going here today. Don't go away.
This is Big Planet College Park. It's Sherin, it's Free Comic Book Day, and we're visiting, and I'm going to introduce these two gentlemen at the very finest of cosplay. Let's talk about Free Comic Book Day and why it's important. Any thoughts?
Well, it's important because as a business, this is what brings people in. You know, you give out something free, and casual readers who've never picked up a comic book before, they actually get their hands on a product, take a look, and then they see what all this behind you is all about.
Yeah.
And it's a great way to get kids in, adults in, because it's something for everybody on those tables.
For me, it's mostly the fact that when we were kids, we naturally just went to the comic book stores because that's all there really was outside of the libraries. But for today's kids, they've got their Xboxes, their 360s, and all that other stuff. These kids, and there's quite a few of them that have been in and out of the store in the past hour or so that we've been here. They start getting that appreciation because they see, oh wow, okay, this is where Thor came from. This is how they got the story for the Iron Man movie. This is how Batman came to be what he is in The Dark Knight, and so on and so forth in Star Wars. It just opens their minds up to a whole new world.
I'm here to spread literacy for all the children who are out there watching. Be out there, read a book, get out into the sun, get away from your little computers and your video games, and enjoy life a little more.
We're at Alliance Comics in Silver Spring, Maryland. You know, one of my favorite things is to meet other women who love comics. So I'm standing here with Amy McNeil, who is co-owner of Alliance Comics.
Free Comic Book Day matters because it helps get both old fans back into the hobby because they're interested and they come in, and for a lot of younger readers, it's their first exposure to comics. So it works in a lot of different ways. People who are currently into comics and excited about, new projects and things that are going on come in and, catch up on interesting things. People who used to be into comics come in and check back in.
Yeah.
And new people, kids get their start.
Cool. So what have been the big titles today, that everybody's loving?
Mouse Guard was definitely big this morning. Star Wars, Clone Wars. Star Wars is always huge every year. People have been really into Captain America and Thor today, especially with the new Thor movie out.
Right.
And Green Lantern, because they're looking, at the Green Lantern movie that's coming out shortly. Because a lot of people just saw Thor, they saw the Green Lantern trailer in there.
Okay, cool. Any fun stories to tell about Free Comic Book Day?
Our 2 o'clock trivia contest was very challenging this year. I really think that people weren't expecting quite the difficulty level that came into it.
I heard a sample question was if you bought a comic book, if you bought Spider-Man in 63, 73, and 83, what would the cumulative cost have been at the time? And I was like, okay.
Yeah, that was definitely a challenging question. I mean, there were some questions in there that weren't too hard, but there were some that were just brutal.
I'm here now in Victory Comics in Falls Church, Virginia, and I'm with owner Jeff Weaver.
Today's a really busy day. This is Free Comic Book Day. It's the busiest day of the year in terms of comic fans coming in, getting a lot of free books, and filling their collections with other books that we have here in the store.
So how do you guys make the day special?
Well, this year we had half a dozen local artists who came in, doing sketches for the kids, offering to do commissions for folks, and so it gave a chance for them to get some exposure and for local fans to see some of the up-and-comers in the comic world.
What does Free Comic Book Day mean to you?
Well, I think that really what Free Comic Book Day is an opportunity for people who may not be, buying comics every week or buying comics regularly to sort of come in, check out, see what's going on in comics, and see if it's something that they'd like to sort of become involved with on a more regular basis. So we saw a lot of kids came in, so that's great. So
Yeah.
we like the younger readers.
This is David Finch, and you are watching Fantastic Forum.
Hello, viewers. Ulysses Campbell, producer of Fantastic Forum, coming to you today with yet another edition of the Fantastic Forum Mailbag. Today's letter comes from Eric Smith of Dallas, Texas, who is watching us online. Thanks, Eric. It says, I attend comic conventions along the East Coast sometimes, in addition to the South. I've heard on your show that you go to Baltimore, to the Baltimore Comic Convention. Will you be making any appearances at other conventions? Well, Eric, thanks for asking about that. And I appreciate that a lot of comics fans travel to various conventions, gathering interviews and material for the show. I have been to the Baltimore Comic Convention, I've been to the New York Comic Convention, I've also been to Wizard World Philly, and I've had a blast at all of those. But one of the things that we're going to be trying to do in the near future is trying to make a much bigger appearance at some of the local comic conventions and possibly some of the more national shows. I'd like to get out, have a booth, be able to interact with fans. I want to get some scantily clad models, either in some really tight Fantastic Forum t-shirts or dressed up like superheroines, and to have them passing out literature about the show. And so all that stuff is in the works. We keep getting better and better and bigger the longer this thing goes on. So we appreciate you for watching, because that helps us get better, it helps us get bigger. So hang in there with us and keep watching for us at these conventions, and who knows, you're likely to find us there in the near future. Thanks for watching. We're back, and I'm here with Billie Rae Bates and Roberto Ortiz and Marc Villa, and we are talking super intelligence and all its various facets and permutations. So when last we met our stalwart panel, you had just mentioned Luthor and Superman.
Yeah.
And I was saying that Superman is also, like that super intelligence apparently is one of his powers, because he can build these incredibly lifelike robots. The Fortress of Solitude, well, the revised version is that the crystals made it. But in the original comics, he built the Fortress of Solitude himself.
But it's one of those but. Yes, Superman is supposed to be really smart. But the way, if I was Luthor, the way I would approach it is, did he earn this? Or was it just the fact that basically he comes from another planet and that makes him special? Because if I was Luthor, from my point of view, I would be like, how dare you? I am basically the person who made myself from nothing to basically become the top of the food chain, as you correctly pointed out before, into Metropolis. How dare you? You have these great abilities and people admire you, not for your intellect, but for the fact that you can stop a train. I can cure cancer. So
there's also, I think, something to be said about how the difference between how heroes and villains handle their intelligence. Lex Luthor clearly believes, hey, I am the smartest man in the world. I did this, I did that. Why is the world not bowing down before me as a god? There's, needless to say, a certain amount of arrogance there.
Oh yeah.
And Superman certainly, you know, may be his intellectual equal. Some might say he's smarter than Luthor, but he's not gonna show it. You know, he doesn't. Superman is very humble. He's not gonna brag about it, or, you know, make it an issue. That's, you know, that's part of his thing.
Well, look on the other end of the spectrum at Charles Xavier, because he's incredibly gifted, scientifically gifted, but he's driven by the need to help all of these mutants. So he channels all of that into a need to help other people, a very humanitarian cause.
But the interesting thing is, do you notice that the thin line between the hero and the villain, specifically scientifically minded, is the arrogance? That basically it's the arrogance seems to be the tipping point, like basically
it's a self-centeredness. It's a self-indulgence.
Yes.
Yes.
It's like Dr. Doom basically is a person who could have been the intellectual equal of Reed Richards and could have done a lot of good, but the arrogance basically tipped him in the other direction in a big way. Luthor the same way. He could basically get what he wants, but that ego, that arrogance is the one that basically pushes him in the other direction in a very powerful way. And I think that's what makes the character so compelling, that there's that thing, that X factor that basically you cannot help but to admire, that you wish you had those brains, and in a way that chutzpah, to basically have that level of self-awareness and self-centeredness.
You know who else is really smart?
Who?
Is the Black Panther.
Yes.
Shala. I mean, this guy, you know, I mean, and you know, of course, he's got access to the vibranium, which he has, you know, mined, and, you know, uses that in a lot of his inventions. But, you know, he's, what, like the third smartest guy in Marvel or something, you know? Sort of like playing on that Mr. Terrific.
Yeah, Mr. Terrific.
Who claims that, oh, I'm the third smartest man in the world. You know, it's like, okay, you're the third smartest man? But, hey,
so who are the first two, by the way?
I figured it was like Luthor and Batman. That's a good question. I guess we'd have to ask Mr. Terrific.
And he's okay with being third place? Really?
That's
well,
pretty
like
good,
you
though.
said,
that is pretty good.
Yeah, you know, but like you said, the ego. You know, I mean, he is totally lacking in that. I mean, I suppose, you know, Mr. Terrific, if he were a villain, he'd say, I'm the smartest man in the world. But, you know, Mr. Terrific, the hero, says, I'm the third smartest man in the world. And he's smart enough to know that there are these other two guys who are actually smarter than he is. And somehow he can quantify that intelligence so that he's positive, that that's where he ranks.
But the character is called Mr. Terrific. I mean, for crying out loud. It's like...
It's funny we mentioned Mr. Terrific, because I'm thinking of the Justice Society, and there seem to be a lot of smart people on that team. He's not alone. I think, you know, Dr. Midnight. He's kind of the medical. He's the medic of the entire DC superhero community.
Who happens to be blind? Thank you very much. A blind surgeon.
Because you know, it's got to take a lot of brains to, you know, service, you know, that kind of clientele. Anytime a superhero in the DC universe gets hurt or wounded, it's like, okay, we got to get you to New York to see Dr. Midnight, and that's, you know, that's quite a burden to shoulder. I think he may be very smart, but it also makes me wonder if you know, Dr. Midnight doesn't sometimes feel, my gosh, I'm the only one who can deal with this.
Actually, that's very true. You usually think of intellect in terms of the sciences of building weapons and big machines, but medicine is something that you rarely see in comic books. Specifically being somebody who specializes in the superhero community, who happens to be extremely smart in that specific area, and he's a perfect example. You're absolutely right. Okay, how about female scientists? Do we have many?
Oh, yes, we need to think of some female scientists. I mean, the first one that I think of is Dr. Light.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, in terms of DC.
What's a doctor?
Would Poison Ivy count?
Yes.
As a female scientist?
Yes, we mentioned that before, definitely.
She was a scientist. Yes,
she
you're right.
was like a botanist, like a plant biologist or a botanist before she got all demented.
No, actually, some people might. There's been a reconsideration of the characters. There's some people like me who consider her to be an eco-terrorist, which is different. I don't think she's crazy.
Well, she was very much portrayed that way on the Batman series from just a few years ago. She was portrayed as more of a terrorist slant.
And I think that basically, if you hear what she's saying, she kind of has a point, and specifically in terms of taking the point of defending Mother Earth, number one. And,
to a fanaticism.
Yeah. And that's what makes the character so compelling. But she, yes, was a scientist, and people tend to downplay that. And it was a very important quality of her, because the power she acquires under her own research.
When you mention eco-terrorism, the first person I thought of was Ra's al Ghul. you
Yeah.
know, who also apparently has some smarts. And you know, that whole, I mean, you know, I know we're talking about, you know, smarts as opposed, but when I, you know, the eco-terrorist, I mean, he was created to be this, I mean, that exactly. You know?
Anyone who can somehow harvest or manifest the ability to bring people back from the dead is probably pretty smart.
And you just gather a lot of smarts after being alive for so many centuries.
That's true.
Yeah.
It comes with experience, right?
Yeah, and that's another one, Vandal Savage.
Yes.
You know, I mean, because get this, I found out recently, because I was wondering, you know, I know there was a recent show we were talking about superhero rogues galleries. I didn't know whose villain Vandal Savage was. Do any of you have any idea
No.
whose villain Vandal Savage is?
He crops up in so many
Justice
places.
League of America. That
Anybody
would
else
be
got
my
any?
guess.
Mark?
I'll go with Roberto.
No, get this. Golden Age Green Lantern was the
What?
first comic in which Vandal Savage appeared.
I don't see that working. How the heck do you? Wow.
Look, I have no idea.
Golden Age is in Alan.
Yes, Alan Scott.
Alan Scott,
Exactly.
okay.
Yes.
Wow.
You know, in fact, I think it might have been number 49, but don't hold me to that. You know, but I remember checking and being very surprised. But on that note, and I know I absolutely wasted our last few seconds. We are out of time. Geez, maybe I need to start doing a podcast too, you know, where you have more time to investigate some of these very serious issues.
Yes.
Yes. But I'd like to thank my panelists and you two for tuning in. If you have any questions about anything you've seen or want further information about anything that we've talked about, you can always email us at producer@dcfantasticforum.com. You can also visit our website, which is www.fantasticforum.tv. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you like it well enough that you'll come back and tell all your friends. Oh, we're also on YouTube and on Vimeo, so you can watch online if you don't happen to be anywhere in the viewing area. Tune in again. Same bat time, same bat station.